The wind howled through Copper Canyon as if the rocks themselves were whispering something ancient that no one had ever understood. The sun had just slipped behind the red cliffs, leaving behind shadows coated in moss and the musty scent of untamed earth. No one should have been there at that hour. Yet a sound echoed, small, broken, nearly swallowed by the wind. Not the cry of a wolf. Not the screech of an owl piercing the twilight sky. But a whinny. A long whinny, dragging its final note like a cry for help, from a soul trapped between life and the wild instinct to flee. Wild Heart Rescue received the alert at 6:18 p.m. We heard a horse, or at least a large animal, screaming repeatedly on the east side of Copper Canyon. We're not sure where exactly, but it sounds hurt. Veterinarian Elena Rodriguez, 35 years old and wearing a baseball cap, jumped into the all-terrain vehicle within 3 minutes. She had been through hundreds of wildlife rescues, from lost mountain lion cubs to fawns fallen into wells. But this time, something felt different. The silence on the other end of the line, the slight tremor in the caller's voice, and the way the wind howled over the ridges, as if concealing something waiting to be uncovered. Could be a wild horse? Marcus asked, checking the tranquilizer dart. Maybe, Elena replied, eyes fixed on the GPS map. But if it's crying out for help, then it might be more than just an injury. Something's keeping it from leaving. Sarah, the final-year veterinary intern, went still. A wild horse that doesn't flee when wounded means it's protecting something. Or someone. No one answered. Only the engine's soft growl over the rugged terrain, and the last rays of daylight vanishing behind the stacked cliffs like the fractured fingers of an ancient mountain. When they reached the reported location, the headlights swept through a narrow crevice and landed on a site that left all three frozen in place. A jet-black horse, tall and powerful, its entire body soaked in sweat and dust, stood blocking the path in the canyon. Blood soaked its shoulder and left leg, a wound so deep the red muscle beneath was clearly visible. Yet the horse didn't move, didn't panic, didn't run. It only stared, a direct gaze, wild, but not hostile. Like a final gatekeeper, fully aware that if it stepped away, whatever lay behind would collapse. Elena slowly lowered the car window. My God, what is he protecting? No one answered, because in the very next second, the horse, later named Koda, stepped forward, let out a long, echoing whinny toward them, then immediately turned to shield something lying beneath his body. Koda didn't move much, just one step, then stopped, but the way he stood guard, ears perked high, chest heaving, eyes locked on Elena, was not panic, not pain, it was vigilance, steadfast, cold. He didn't care about the blood trickling from his leg. He didn't care about the blinding headlights in his eyes. He only cared about one thing: don't take another step. Elena raised her hand slowly, palm open. It's okay, friend, we're not here to hurt you. But Koda didn't back down. Still in the same stance. One leg slightly bent, perhaps from pain, but his body remained between the canyon walls, shielding whatever was hidden beneath his chest and belly. Sarah whispered, there's something under there, can you see it? Marcus crouched, narrowing his eyes, and then all three of them simultaneously held their breath. Beneath the dust, between Koda's legs, nestled among stones and damp grass, was a small shape, hard to make out. At first, they thought it was a bag, or an old blanket, but then, a tiny arm twitched. A sound, not loud, barely more than a breath, but enough to freeze time. Elena opened her mouth but no words came out. Sarah began to cry softly behind her. And Marcus, the one who was always tough, only whispered, no way. In the pale yellow light, a newborn baby appeared, wrapped in a blanket, her head exposed, her cheeks flushed red from the cold, eyes closed, but her skin still pink. A near impossibility in temperatures below 5 degrees. And Koda still stood protectively in front, not letting them get close, not letting them touch the child. Elena inhaled deeply, her voice trembling. He's keeping the baby alive. She didn't mean it metaphorically. She meant it literally. Had Koda not used his body to shield her, the little girl would have frozen to death long ago. Elena pulled out her approach kit from her backpack, motioned for Marcus to step back, and she slowly took a step forward. Koda, she said, calling the name as if she'd known it all along. You've done so well. Now let me carry that forward. But the moment she got within a meter, Koda let out a fierce whinny, stomped his hoof against the rocks, kicking up dust, the protective gaze turning to warning in an instant. Not because he hated humans. Not because he was wild. But because he didn't yet know if he could trust them. We have to do something, Marcus whispered. Elena looked at her watch. The temperature was still dropping. The child couldn't hold on much longer. But if they rushed in, they'd lose both. She stepped back a few paces, then sat down on the ground, at eye level with Koda. No commands, no pleading, just silence. The wind swept through her hair. The headlights kept shining, but now, it was only a woman sitting still on the earth, and a bloodied wild horse guarding a tiny life that hadn't even been named. And then, Koda looked at her, his eyes still sharp, but, in that fleeting moment, Elena saw something else: weariness, trust, and a fragile thread of hope. Slowly, Koda lowered his head a little. Not retreating, but no longer tense. And Elena knew, he had given her permission to approach. Elena didn't get up right away. She remained seated, waiting a few more seconds, as if needing Koda to confirm one last time. And indeed, Koda didn't whinny. He simply exhaled deeply, lowering his head close to the ground. A kind of gentle surrender. Not to humans, but to hope. She approached, slowly, one step at a time, bringing nothing but her empty, open hands. As she got closer, Elena knelt right beside Koda's front leg, and for the first time, she could clearly see the full form of the tiny being he had been protecting all this time without anyone knowing. It was a baby girl, no bigger than a loaf of bread, her cheeks smudged with dirt, her hair stuck to her forehead, but her skin still held warmth. Her body was wrapped in a worn gray blanket, torn at one corner, but it still retained heat. Maybe someone had tried to protect her, and failed. Or abandoned her, and hoped for a miracle. And then, that miracle had actually happened. Koda had found her, and hadn't left her side for a single step. Oh my God? Sarah exhaled like the wind. Marcus turned his face away, even though he had joined disaster relief missions during last year's floods. He had never seen anything like this. Elena leaned in closer, her hand trembling as she placed her finger on the baby's wrist. The pulse was still there. She's alive, Elena whispered. You kept her alive, Koda. You really did the impossible. Koda remained silent, but his ears twitched slightly, as if he heard. Somehow, he understood. Suddenly, the baby girl whimpered, not a cry, more like a whisper in a dream. Elena froze. She wasn't sure she'd heard it right. The baby stirred, her tiny lips moved, and a sound escaped, soft as spring grass. Da. The entire team stood frozen. She just called for her dad? Sarah stammered. No way. Marcus murmured. A baby that small, still able to make a sound? Elena gently squeezed the baby's hand. No, she said slowly. She's not calling for her father. She's calling for her protector. She looked up at Koda, the horse who still stood there, exhausted, but never once taking his eyes off the baby girl. Elena turned to Marcus. Call the chopper now. Newborn. Miraculous survival. Possible delayed hypothermia. We don't have much time. Marcus sprinted to the vehicle. Sarah knelt down to help Elena lift the baby. Carefully, slowly, each time the child was moved from the ground. Koda snorted and flinched, as if his heart was being pulled from his body. It's okay, Elena whispered. We're not taking her from you. We're just helping you keep her alive longer. And strangely, Koda didn't resist, didn't step forward, didn't whinny. He just followed, step by step, his front leg limping from injury, but still walking, without rest, like a father, or a brother, willing to drag himself to the ends of the earth just to make sure that child was safe. When the helicopter arrived, its lights swept across the canyon, the engine roaring through the narrow gorge. Elena held Callista, the name faintly written on a slip of paper tied around the baby's wrist, as she boarded the cabin. She turned back, looking at Koda, the horse no one understood, yet everyone knew had just performed a miracle. She touched his neck. We'll come back, I promise you. Koda looked at her, that gaze, as deep as a chasm. Then, he let out a whinny. Long, painful, but beautiful. That whinny, long afterward, was still spoken of by the people of Copper Canyon as the farewell of a wild spirit who had just given humanity its most precious gift. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, Red dust settled on Koda's body like an unnamed mourning shroud. He didn't move, didn't whinny again. He just stood there, silently watching the one he had guarded and loved, without expecting anything in return. A few hours later, at the Willow Glen Town Medical Center, Callista was placed inside an incubator. The baby girl was mildly comatose due to exhaustion, but the doctors called the case a biological miracle. In temperatures below 5 degrees Celsius, with an infant's body heat dropping minute by minute, Callista should have stopped breathing long ago. But thanks to a living creature, not a heater, not a human, she was still alive. Elena couldn't leave the hospital that night. She sat outside the incubator room, eyes unblinking as she watched Callista sleep, her tiny fingers twitching in rhythm with her dreams. Then, almost instinctively, she pulled out her phone and replayed the video Sarah had recorded earlier. The scene unfolded. Koda, standing in the canyon, his body covered in blood and dirt, leaning protectively over Callista, his head bowed as if cradling her. Not afraid, not running away, just standing there, like a father guarding his little daughter. Elena thought to herself, that wasn't instinct anymore, that was love. The next morning, Elena returned to the scene with Marcus and Sarah. They found Koda, still there. He lay on his side, made no sound, didn't get up as they approached. His eyes were still, like a dried-up lake. Elena knelt beside him. You don't have to guard her anymore, she said, her voice soft as the wind. Callista is safe now. It's our turn to help you. Koda looked at her, then lowered his head. As if finally, after so many days, he allowed himself to rest. Getting Koda onto the animal rescue ambulance was no easy task. He weighed nearly 400 kilograms, and his front leg had a severe bone fracture. But the strange thing was, throughout the process, Koda didn't resist. Not a single whinny. Only when the vehicle began to move, toward the veterinary hospital, near Callista's ward, did he let out a quiet sound. Soft, like a sigh. The whole team was silent. Sarah broke down again. He just wanted to make sure he'd be brought close to her. At the veterinary hospital, Koda underwent emergency surgery. The procedure lasted 3 hours. Elena stood outside the whole time, clutching the slip of paper she had found tied around Callista's wrist. Her name is Callista. Please, let her live. Perhaps her mother had abandoned her. Perhaps not. But now, a wild animal had chosen to keep that promise in someone's place. And the name Callista, the most beautiful one, had survived, under the skin. The blood, and the instincts of a wild Mustang. When the surgery ended, the vet let out a sigh of relief. Koda will live, but he needs time, and a reason to fight. Elena simply nodded. He already has one, she said. The baby's name is Callista. And I think, she's waiting to see Koda again. In the neonatal intensive care unit, a soft night light glowed on Callista's pale pink skin. She was still unconscious, her breathing weak but steady, her tiny chest rising and falling like calm waves offshore. Elena stood outside the glass, unblinking. She had witnessed hundreds of emergency cases. But this time, she didn't just see a child. She saw a living miracle. A nurse approached quietly. She's stable, but there's something strange. She handed Elena a note chart. Callista doesn't respond to any human sound. She doesn't cry, doesn't flinch, doesn't turn her head when called. But, the nurse pressed a button. A recording played, faint, a little distorted, but clearly, a horse's whinny. Callista stirred. And then, she smiled. Elena choked up. Mrs. Koda, she whispered. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't a dream. The child who couldn't speak yet, who didn't know who her mother was, recognized. In that whinny, her home. In a treatment room several buildings away. Koda lay still, eyes open, his head resting on an old blanket. He knew nothing of medicine. Didn't understand the concept of recovery. But somehow, Koda felt it. Someone still needed him. He wouldn't eat, didn't sleep deeply, just lay there, waiting. And every time Callista gasped or her heart monitor beeped in alarm, the only one in the hospital to rise instinctively was Koda. 3 days later, Elena decided to do something crazy. She requested permission to bring Koda close to the viewing window. Doctors objected, nurses worried, but Elena insisted. If we don't try, she won't make it. She carried Callista, still attached to medical tubes, to a small window in the back hallway. Koda was led with a soft rope, though everyone knew. No rope could restrain him. Only his heart held him there. And then, the eyes of the two beings met. No tears, no sound, just Callista, barely a few months old, opening her eyes. And Koda, the horse born of wind and stone, tilting his head toward the glass. Callista lifted her tiny hand. Koda touched the glass lightly with his muzzle. Nothing could separate them anymore. The doctors stood frozen. Callista's heartbeat stabilized, for the first time since her rescue. Her skin flushed pink again. Her eyes grew clearer. And for the first time, from deep in her throat, a faint sound escaped her lips. Koda. Elena turned away, not from emotion, but because she understood. A child had just called the name of the first living being she ever loved and trusted. 1 week after being rescued, Callista was still lying in the incubator, but her eyes had begun to follow movement. The doctors called it neurological recovery reflex, but Elena knew it was the reflex of a child trying to find the one thing she was most connected to in this world: Koda's eyes. Koda was still there, brought each day to the hallway with the glass window looking into Callista's room. And every day, exactly at 9 a.m., he would step up to the glass, let out a soft whinny, and stand still. Callista, whether asleep or crying, would immediately calm, open her eyes, and smile, the kind of tiny smile that feels like the sun being born. The small town began to talk. Rumors spread throughout Willow Glen. The horse saved the baby's life. A miracle among the mountains. An animal with the heart of a father. Local news came to interview. They asked Elena, asked the doctors, asked those who had witnessed the rescue. But no one could answer the most important question. Why didn't Koda leave? Why did he save Callista? Elena said only one thing. There are things we don't need to explain. We only need to be grateful. And then, one day, as Marcus was sorting rescue files, he found something that made the entire center fall silent. An old, blurry photo, taken nearly 3 years ago. A therapy camp for children with special needs. In the center of the photo was a curly-haired girl, smiling brightly, and beside her, a jet-black horse, looking straight into the camera. It was Koda. Elena went still. You lived in a therapy center? You used to know children? She didn't finish the sentence. Maybe Koda had once lost a child. Maybe Callista had touched a long-buried memory in his heart. No one knew Koda's past, but everyone could see the present. He had become the father Callista needed. On the 10th day, Elena made an unprecedented request. She asked the hospital for permission to let Callista and Koda meet directly, without the glass. Doctors initially objected. Nurses were worried. But then, after hearing a recording of Callista, murmuring in her sleep, Koda, Koda, they agreed. In a small quiet room, with a soft carpet, Callista was cradled in Elena's arms. Koda was led in. But this time, no rope was needed. He walked slowly, his whole body trembling, not from fear, but from emotion. Those eyes, the eyes of a creature that had lived a life of freedom, were now shimmering with tears. He bowed his head, touched his muzzle gently to Callista's tiny hand, and she, without being taught, without needing instruction, reached out and grasped his mane. Everyone cried, not out of sentimentality, but because they had just witnessed a family being formed. Not of the same species. Not of the same blood. But bound by the one thing that never changes: love. That morning, a gentle mist blanketed Willow Glen. The fog clung softly to the early summer pine branches, glistening like glass. In the garden behind the veterinary hospital, recently converted into a temporary outdoor therapy area, townspeople gathered in quiet stillness. No one spoke. No one smiled. They were simply waiting for something sacred. At the center of the garden, baby Callista, now alert, healthy, and no longer needing a breathing tube, was cradled in Elena's arms. She wore a pale yellow onesie, her eyes wide and round, her tiny hands constantly reaching out as if grasping for something unseen. From the treatment barn across the grounds, Koda appeared. No handler, no rope, only his heart to guide him. A whinny rang out, not fierce, not prolonged, but deep, low, and warm, like a greeting, like the opening line of a strange and beautiful story destined to be retold for generations. Callista turned her head instantly. Her eyes lit up, And for the first time since she was rescued, she let out a laugh. A laugh from a soul returned to life. A laugh from a little girl, greeting the father she never needed an introduction to. Koda stepped closer. Elena gently placed Callista on a soft mat laid over the grass. Keeping one hand lightly on her, Callista crawled toward Koda. Slowly, hesitantly, but with a determination that felt as if she had always known this path. Koda knelt down. One leg was still bandaged, but he lowered his head. Low, so low. Two living beings, one human, one horse, touched. Her cheek pressed to his neck. Her hand wrapped gently into his mane. People began to cry. Marcus captured the moment on video. Sarah clutched her mother's hand. Trembling, Elena whispered, "This is no longer a rescue. This is destiny." From that moment, the legend began to spread. They told the story of Callista, the baby girl who survived the freezing mountains because of a wild horse. Of Koda, the creature once labeled untamable, who became the world's quietest guardian. Schools invited Elena to share the story. City hospitals requested to include images of Callista and Koda in child emotional therapy programs. And in the town of Willow Glen, the people erected a small bronze statue at the entrance to the park. A little girl, head tilted upward in a smile. And beside her, Koda, bowing his head, eyes gentle. On the base of the statue, a line was engraved, not the same voice, but the same heartbeat. One quiet afternoon, while Koda lay sunbathing under the old maple tree and Callista slept peacefully in Elena's arms, the front gate of the medical center suddenly swung open. A woman stepped in, wearing a worn leather jacket, her hair hastily tied back, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and panic. She clutched the front desk. Please let me see the baby." Her voice broke mid-sentence, as if she had brought a storm with her from somewhere far away. Elena heard it. She turned around. The two women's eyes met, and in that instant, Elena knew. There was no need to ask. The woman standing before her was Callista's biological mother. In a private room, once she had calmed down, the woman, Naomi, told them everything. She had been living with her boyfriend at an illegal mining camp deep in the Copper Mountains. When she became pregnant with Callista, Naomi tried many times to escape, but was controlled and beaten. The night a snowstorm swept through, Naomi realized she could no longer keep Callista safe. In a moment of desperation, she wrapped her daughter in a blanket, scrawled the baby's name on a piece of paper, and snuck away from the camp. While searching for help, she slipped off a rocky ledge, broke her leg, and remained unconscious for nearly 2 days. When she awoke, Callista was gone. "I thought she had died," Naomi sobbed. "I was going to end my life. But someone found me. And then, I heard the news. About a horse. And a baby who survived." Elena was speechless. She didn't feel anger toward Naomi. She didn't pity her. She just understood. Because love isn't always stronger than fear. But there are people who, in their final moments, still choose to sacrifice themselves to plant a seed of hope. When Naomi was brought close to Callista, the baby was sleeping. Elena carefully lifted her and placed her into Naomi's arms. Callista stirred, her eyes opened wide. And then, no crying, no fear. Just, the baby resting her head against the woman's chest. As if her heart recognized the sound beneath that unfamiliar skin. But what no one expected was Koda's reaction. He stood a few meters away, watching, his body tensed, ears perked, eyes sharp. No whinny, no stomp, but unmistakable vigilance. As if he wasn't ready to hand Callista over. As if Koda needed more than tears to trust again. Naomi looked at him. She didn't flinch, didn't approach. She knelt, and in front of everyone's eyes, Naomi bowed deeply to Koda. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't deserve her, but you've been her father since the very beginning." Koda blinked. For the first time, he stepped toward her, not out of forgiveness, but because he recognized the truth. Elena wept, not because of the scene unfolding before her, but because she knew, some bonds need no DNA to be real. Only loyalty, and a heart that never gives up. Summer arrived early in the Willow Glen Valley. Lavender had begun to bloom, painting the southern hills in soft purples, and the hospital courtyard was bathed in golden, gentle light. Callista could now toddle. Her steps were wobbly, but her gaze was unwavering, steady. Every time she looked toward Koda, Naomi was still there, staying temporarily in a small inn near the center. She tried to make amends, caring for Callista daily, reading to her, feeding her, retelling old stories in a trembling voice. But Callista never said, "Mama." She only said, "Koda," every time she woke up, every time she had a stomach ache, every time she laughed with joy. Naomi's heart broke, but she didn't feel jealousy. She knew, some bonds are not built by blood, but by survival. Elena arranged a special meeting with the local authorities, lawyers, and Naomi. The question was raised, who would Callista live with? By law, Naomi was the biological mother. She had returned, shown remorse, proven her ability to care, and pleaded for a second chance. But the community offered another suggestion. Could Elena become the official guardian? Could Callista choose? One afternoon, Elena and Naomi sat beneath a tree, Callista between them. She was playing with a blue fabric string, a piece of Koda's old mane, braided into a bracelet. Naomi gently touched her daughter's back. "Do you want to come home with Mama?" Callista looked at her. No tears, no retreat. Then, she turned toward the barn gate, where Koda stood. "Koda," she called. Her bright voice rang through the garden. Koda let out a soft, quiet whinny. Callista sprang up, running toward him like a little gust of wind. Naomi bowed her head, tears spilling freely. "She's already chosen," she whispered. That night, Naomi came to see Elena. She held a paper in her hand. "Guardianship transfer. I signed it," she said softly. She looked up. "Callista belongs where someone never left her behind in the snow. Where she knows she's loved, without condition. She belongs with Koda. And with you." Elena was speechless. Not because of the paper, but because she knew. Naomi had just done the bravest thing a mother could do. To step back so her child could be free to love. The next morning, in the town park, a small ceremony was held. Callista, in her yellow dress, held Elena's hand. Koda stood beside them, his mane gently braided with a satin ribbon. The little girl stepped up onto a wooden platform. She said nothing, just tilted her head to the sky, and let out a whinny. Just like Koda. High, clear, full of life. The crowd burst into applause. Not for a child, but for a choice made by three brave souls. A mother who knew when to step back. A rescuer who chose to step forward. And a wild horse who learned how to hold on to what he loved. Autumn swept into Willow Glen like a reminder that every living soul must eventually meet time face to face. Maple leaves carpeted the paths in gold. And Callista, now able to run, burst into ringing laughter each time Koda whinnied from the lawn. But autumn also carried biting winds. And this time the wind didn't just rattle rooftops. It cut straight into the hearts of those who had dared believe miracles never change. Koda began to breathe with difficulty. At first, only heavy sighs after each step. Then slight buckling in his legs whenever little Callista ran up to hug him. One morning Koda did not leave the stall as usual. He lay motionless, head buried in straw, breathing in broken gasps. Elena found him first. She dropped to her knees beside him, trembling. "Koda?" She called to him as one might call an exhausted father after a long journey. The veterinarian arrived. Preliminary diagnosis: heart failure, delayed fallout from the mountain injuries. Koda had pushed too long, too hard. That body, seemingly wild and indestructible, had in truth been weakening ever since the night he shielded Callista beneath the blizzard. Callista did not understand. All she knew was that Koda lay still, no answering whinny. No familiar tilt of the head. She brought a blanket and draped it over him. Then slipped her own little bracelet, a braid of Koda's mane dyed green, under his leg. And she sat there. She did not cry. She only sat, perfectly still, the way he once kept her safe. That night the wind howled outside. Branches battered the window frames. No rain fell, yet the ground was cold as needles. Elena stayed awake at Koda's side. Naomi came, then Sarah, then Marcus. The whole town filed in quietly. They brought no flowers, no formal prayers. They simply stood in silence, as though guarding a mighty heart preparing to leave the world. Near dawn, when the first light spilled through the slats, Koda stirred. He opened his eyes, and, for the last time, lifted his head to look at Callista. The little girl pressed her lips together and whispered, "Koda, love." Just 2 words, yet all a creature born free could ever need to hear. And then, Koda exhaled a long, gentle breath. No whimper, no fear, merely a breath returning to the mountains like the wind. Callista remained beside him. She did not wail. She bowed her head, and placed a soft kiss upon his forehead. Elena broke into tears. Marcus turned away. Naomi knelt, taking her daughter's hand. They knew, a legend had just departed this world. Not to gunfire, not amid applause, but carried off by the purest love humanity has ever received from a wild soul. A month after Koda passed away, the town of Willow Glen still hadn't fully returned to its usual rhythm. Each morning, people still looked toward the eastern horse stable as if expecting to see that familiar black mane drifting through the mist. But the grassy yard was silent, no neighs to be heard. The winter sky seemed gentler, as if softened by longing. Callista had changed. The little girl no longer ran everywhere calling, Koda, as she used to. But every morning, she would go out to the backyard, carrying the green braid of Koda's mane wrapped in a cloth, placing it gently on the wet grass, and whispering something softly. No one could hear clearly, but everyone understood. She was talking to Koda, as if he had never left. Elena and Naomi decided to do something greater to preserve the memory. They started a charity foundation called Koda's Light. Its mission: to provide animal-assisted therapy for abandoned children, orphans, or those who had experienced trauma. The state government funded it. Nearby towns offered their support. And notably, the program invited Callista, now just over 3 years old, to participate in a national television broadcast introducing the foundation. National television. Millions of viewers. The host knelt down, brought the microphone to Callista, and asked gently, "Do you miss Koda?" Callista nodded. Then she placed her hand on her chest. "Here," she said. Then, after a brief pause, she added a full sentence, for the first time, her voice small but clear. "Koda is my home." The entire studio went silent. A child who had never known her father. A creature who wasn't human. And a love that needed no bloodline, no language, but forever redefined the most sacred word, home. The clip aired nationwide. The next day, thousands of messages, handwritten letters, and wishes poured into the center. People sent drawings, horse toys, and even stories about dogs, cats, or horses who had helped them through grief. Elena and Naomi sat reading each letter with Callista. One letter from Alaska read, "We opened a horse rescue named after Koda." One from Japan said, "Your story made my son want to love animals again." Another from an 89-year-old man, "I cried for the first time in 30 years. Because of a horse." Then, on a windless afternoon, Callista ran into the house holding a crumpled piece of paper. "I drew Koda," she said. Elena looked. It was a picture of a large horse standing, shielding a little girl from the rain. The girl asked, "Mommy, can I draw more?" "What more, sweetheart?" Callista tilted her head. "I want to draw a horse with wings, so Koda can fly anywhere and still protect me." Elena hugged her tightly. No more explanations were needed. No more broadcasts. No bronze statues. Because Koda had become immortal. In the heart of a little girl who knew how to love, how to choose, and how to hold on to memory with a smile. 10 years after the day Koda took his last breath, Willow Glen had changed. Old houses were renovated. A new school was built next to the old hill, where Callista once called out, "Koda," in the winter. And on that hill, a new therapy center was born. Made of pine wood, with a red tile roof, fragrant lavender gardens, and a statue in the center. A horse with wings, gentle eyes, head bowed beside a little girl. On the base of the statue, a single inscription was carved. "This is our home." Callista was now 13 years old. Long curly hair, eyes as calm as a mountain spring, and a voice deeper but still strangely warm. She no longer lived in the spotlight of television. Instead, Callista became a guide for children like her once, those who didn't know what father meant, and only longed to be loved by a gaze, without conditions. Every Saturday morning at the center, Callista told the story of Koda. She never cried while telling it. She only smiled. Some love needs no words. And some hearts, even wild ones, are more loyal than anything we've ever known. The children listened. Some were orphans from war. Some had been abandoned in forests. Some had never called anyone dad or mom. But when they heard about Koda, the horse who lay down and gave warmth to a child, they began to believe again. One afternoon, Callista brought a new boy into the stable. The boy trembled, afraid to step closer. Callista knelt down and whispered, "They don't need you to be strong. They just need to know you won't run away." The boy looked up, and for the first time in his life, reached out to touch the nose of a sleeping horse. Callista turned away, tears falling silently, because she knew Koda was still there, not in the sound of a neigh, but in every child brave enough to believe that love isn't a reward, but a quiet flame passed on from one soul to another. She looked up at the sky. Late afternoon, purple clouds, soft breeze, a bird soared across. "Thank you, Koda," she whispered, "for showing me what it means not to be abandoned, and for teaching me how to become a home for wandering hearts." Legends don't die. They simply learn to be silent and keep living through those who know how to love like a wild horse once did. If you're still here, perhaps your heart has been touched too, just like the way Callista once touched Koda's mane. This isn't just a story about a wild horse, not just a rescue during a snowy season, but a gentle reminder. True love doesn't need to be spoken. It only needs to be kept. Koda left behind no will, no medals, only a child who knew how to love, how to believe, and how to pass warmth to others. If you've ever felt lost, abandoned, or thought this world wasn't made for tender hearts, remember, there was a horse, once called Wild, who became a home for a child who thought no one wanted her. And if you listen closely, you might still hear that neigh. In the wind, in a child's smile, and in your very own heart. Leave a comment. Where are you watching from? Who does this story remind you of? And if you believe love can transcend species and time, type, "I still hear Koda's neigh." Don't forget to subscribe. Share this story with someone who might need a little warmth. And we'll see you again on another journey where loyalty needs no words to be proven.